The lights blazed down on the packed auditorium as Kamala Harris stepped to the microphone, her face twisted with anger that nobody saw coming. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. The Vice President of the United States was about to have a complete meltdown on live television, screaming at one of her own party members in front of thousands of people. But this wasn't just any random outburst. This was the culmination of months of behind-the-scenes tension that had been building like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Harris had been under intense scrutiny lately, with her approval ratings dropping and criticism mounting from all sides. The stress was clearly getting to her, and everyone was about to see just how much. Jasmine Crockett stood just 20 feet away, calm as ice, waiting for the storm to hit. She had no idea that her quiet, measured response would not only silence Harris but create one of the most viral political moments of the year. The crowd held its breath as Harris raised her voice to a level that made everyone uncomfortable. What made this moment even more shocking was the setting. This was supposed to be a friendly, collaborative event where Democrats came together to show unity. Instead, it was about to become a battleground where one woman's career would be launched while another's would be seriously damaged. "You think you know better than me?" Harris shouted, her voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "You're nothing but a freshman representative who doesn't understand how this game works." But what Crockett said next would change everything. Her response was so calm, so perfectly delivered, that it would leave Harris speechless and send the crowd into a frenzy. This wasn't just a political disagreement. This was about to become a defining moment that would reshape how America sees both of these women. What nobody in that auditorium knew was that this confrontation had been brewing for months. Harris had been making private comments about Crockett to other Democratic leaders, calling her too ambitious for her own good, and suggesting that she needed to learn her place in the party hierarchy. Word of these comments had gotten back to Crockett, but she had chosen to take the high road and focus on her work rather than respond to the personal attacks. The irony was that Harris's behavior was exactly what voters were tired of seeing from their politicians. While Crockett represented a new generation of leaders who focused on policy and serving their constituents, Harris represented the old guard of politicians who seemed more concerned with protecting their own power and status than actually getting things done. This moment was about to expose that difference in the most dramatic way possible, in front of thousands of witnesses and millions of viewers who would see the footage online within hours. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the most shocking political moments. Trust me, you're going to want to see every second of what happens next because this confrontation will leave you speechless. Now let's see exactly what happened when Kamala Harris lost control, and how Jasmine Crockett's brilliant response stunned everyone watching. To understand why this confrontation was so shocking, you need to know who these two women are and why this moment mattered so much. Kamala Harris, the sitting vice president, had built her career on being tough, calculated, and always in control. From her days as a prosecutor in California to her time in the Senate, she was known for her sharp questioning and ability to stay cool under pressure. But lately, things had been different. Polls were dropping, criticism was mounting, and the pressure was getting to her. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, the freshman representative from Texas who had quickly made a name for herself as someone who wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. At just 42 years old, she had already become one of the most respected voices among younger Democrats. She was smart, articulate, and had a way of staying calm even when others around her were losing their minds. The setting was the annual Democratic Leadership Conference, where party leaders gathered to discuss strategy and present a united front. This was supposed to be a routine event, a chance for Democrats to show they were working together. Instead, it was about to become the stage for one of the most embarrassing public meltdowns in recent political history. The tension had been building for weeks. Harris had been pushing a controversial strategy that many younger Democrats, including Crockett, thought was a mistake. The strategy involved compromising on key progressive issues to appeal to moderate voters, something that Crockett and other younger party members saw as abandoning the values that got them elected. Behind closed doors, there had been heated discussions, with Crockett respectfully but firmly opposing Harris's approach. What made things worse was that Crockett's opposition wasn't just philosophical. She had data to back up her position. Polling from her district and others showed that voters actually wanted Democrats to be more progressive, not less. When she presented this information in private meetings, Harris had dismissed it, saying that Crockett didn't understand real politics and was too inexperienced to grasp the bigger picture. The personal animosity had grown when Crockett's policy proposals started gaining support from other party members. Harris saw this as a direct challenge to her authority and had been making increasingly hostile comments about inexperienced newcomers who think they know better. Several Democratic leaders had tried to mediate between them, but Harris refused to engage in any meaningful dialogue. What made the situation even more volatile was that Crockett had been gaining national attention for her smart, articulate responses to Republican attacks during congressional hearings. Media outlets had started calling her the future of the Democratic Party, which only seemed to infuriate Harris more. Sources close to the vice president said she felt threatened by the younger woman's rising star and had been looking for an opportunity to put her in her place. The irony was that Crockett had always been respectful toward Harris, even when they disagreed. She had tried multiple times to arrange private meetings to discuss their differences, but Harris had refused. Instead, the vice president had chosen to make their conflict public, apparently believing that her experience and position would give her an advantage in any confrontation. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The auditorium was packed with over 2,000 Democratic leaders, activists, and media representatives. Cameras were rolling, social media was watching, and everyone expected to see party unity. Instead, they were about to witness something that would dominate headlines for weeks and change how people viewed both women forever. The guest list for this event read like a who's who of Democratic politics. Former governors, senators, House members, major donors, and influential activists had all come to hear about the party's future direction. Many had paid significant money to attend, expecting to see a professional, inspiring presentation about democratic values and strategy. What they were about to get instead was a front-row seat to one of the most unprofessional displays in modern American political history. The irony was that many of these people had specifically requested that both Harris and Crockett appear together, hoping to see the established leadership working with the rising stars of the party. The media presence was particularly significant. This wasn't just local news coverage. Major networks had sent their top political correspondents, and the event was being live-streamed to thousands of viewers online. Every major political blog and news website would be covering this event, making the stakes incredibly high for both women. Nobody in that room could have predicted that they were about to witness a moment that would fundamentally change the trajectory of American politics and create one of the most analyzed political confrontations in recent memory. As Harris took the stage for what was supposed to be a collaborative discussion about the party's future, something was clearly wrong. Her usual composed demeanor was nowhere to be found. Her hands were shaking slightly, her jaw was clenched, and there was a look in her eyes that suggested she was about to explode. People who knew Harris well later said they had never seen her like this before. Even during her most heated Senate confirmation hearings or intense campaign moments, she had always maintained a level of professional composure. But something about this situation, about having to share a stage with Crockett, seemed to have triggered something in her that she couldn't control. The stage setup itself seemed to amplify the tension. Both women were seated at a long table, but instead of the usual collaborative arrangement where politicians sit next to each other, they were positioned at opposite ends. The distance between them seemed to emphasize the growing divide, and the bright stage lights created a stark, almost confrontational atmosphere. Behind the scenes, Harris's staff had been worried about this appearance for days. Some had even suggested that she skip the event or find a way to avoid being on the same panel as Crockett. But Harris had insisted on going through with it, apparently believing that she could use the opportunity to establish her dominance over the younger politician. That decision was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. The first sign that something was wrong came when Harris began her opening remarks. Instead of the usual polished presentation everyone expected, her voice had an edge to it that immediately put the audience on alert. She started talking about loyalty and understanding your place in ways that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some people in this party, Harris said, her voice getting louder with each word, think they can just show up and start making demands. They think because they won one election, they know how to run the country. The camera panned to Crockett, who was sitting in the front row, her expression calm but alert. She clearly knew Harris was talking about her, but she didn't react. She just sat there, hands folded, watching Harris with the kind of steady gaze that suggested she was ready for whatever was coming. Harris continued, "There are people here who need to learn that there's a difference between being confident and being arrogant. There's a difference between having good ideas and thinking you know everything." The audience was getting uncomfortable. This wasn't the kind of speech anyone expected at a unity conference. Murmurs started rippling through the crowd. Some people were looking at their phones, probably wondering if they should be recording this. Others were looking at Crockett, trying to gauge her reaction. That's when things took a dramatic turn. Harris paused in her speech, looked directly at Crockett and said, "Some people need to remember that respect is earned, not given. And some people haven't earned anything yet." The auditorium went dead silent. Everyone knew this had just become personal. Crockett slowly stood up from her seat, her movements deliberate and calm. She walked toward the stage with the kind of confidence that suggested she had been expecting this moment and was ready for it. As Crockett approached the microphone that had been set up for the Q&A portion, Harris's demeanor changed completely. The controlled anger she had been displaying suddenly erupted into something much more raw and desperate. It was as if seeing Crockett calmly walking toward the stage triggered something in Harris that she couldn't control. "Don't you dare," Harris said, her voice now clearly audible through the main microphone. "Don't you dare think you can just walk up here and—" But Crockett kept walking. She reached the microphone, adjusted it to her height, and waited. The entire auditorium was holding its breath. Camera phones were coming out everywhere. This was clearly about to become a moment that would be replayed thousands of times on social media. Harris was now visibly shaking. Whatever composure she had left was completely gone. The Vice President of the United States was about to have a complete public breakdown, and everyone in the room could see it coming. The cameras were capturing every moment of this. Professional photographers in the media section were snapping pictures of Harris's increasingly agitated state, while audience members were discreetly pulling out their phones. Everyone seemed to sense that they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. What made the situation even more dramatic was the contrast between the two women. Harris looked increasingly unhinged, her hair slightly disheveled from her animated gestures, her voice getting higher and more strained with each word. Meanwhile, Crockett remained perfectly composed, her posture straight, her expression calm but alert. Some people in the audience later said they could literally feel the tension in the room, like electricity before a thunderstorm. The air seemed thick with anticipation as everyone waited to see what would happen next. "You want to say something?" Harris shouted, her voice now carrying throughout the entire auditorium without even needing the microphone. "You think you have something important to add? Well, let me tell you something about importance." The crowd was stunned. Some people were covering their mouths in shock. Others were frantically typing on their phones. This was not normal behavior for any politician, let alone the vice president. But Harris wasn't done. She was just getting started. And what came next would be even worse. What made this moment so shocking was not just what Harris was saying, but how she was saying it. Her voice had taken on a shrill quality that seemed to echo through the auditorium in an uncomfortable way. Her facial expressions were becoming increasingly distorted with anger, and she was gesturing wildly as if she was losing control of her own body language. The professional cameras that were recording the event for later broadcast were capturing every moment of this breakdown. The camera operators, who had probably filmed hundreds of political events, seemed unsure of how to frame what they were seeing. Do you focus on Harris as she loses control? Do you show Crockett's calm reaction? Do you pan to the shocked audience? In the end, they captured it all, creating a visual record of one of the most unprofessional displays ever seen from a sitting vice president. The footage would be analyzed frame by political commentators and body language experts for weeks to come. Meanwhile, Crockett remained perfectly still. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around nervously. She didn't try to interrupt or defend herself. She simply sat there with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have nothing to be ashamed of and nothing to hide. Her composure was so striking that even some of Harris's supporters in the audience began to feel uncomfortable about what their chosen leader was doing. This wasn't politics. This was bullying, and it was happening on a national stage. What happened next will be remembered as one of the most shocking moments in modern political history. Harris completely lost control, and her next words sent shockwaves through the entire auditorium. "You think you know better than me?" Harris screamed, her voice now so loud that people in the back rows could hear every word clearly. "You're nothing. You're a nobody who got lucky in one election. You don't know anything about real leadership." The crowd gasped audibly. Some people actually stood up from their seats in shock. This was the Vice President of the United States screaming at a fellow Democrat in front of thousands of people and rolling cameras. It was political suicide happening in real time. But Harris wasn't finished. She pointed directly at Crockett and continued yelling, "I've been fighting for this party since before you even knew what politics was. I was a prosecutor when you were still figuring out what you wanted to do with your life, and you think you can just waltz in here and tell me how things should be done?" The entire auditorium was in complete shock. Some people were looking around as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Others had their phones out, clearly recording what was happening. This was going to be everywhere within minutes. Crockett stood at the microphone, completely calm. She waited for Harris to finish her tirade, showing no emotion whatsoever. When Harris finally paused to catch her breath, Crockett spoke into the microphone, and her voice was so calm and controlled that it created an immediate contrast that everyone in the room felt. "Madam Vice President," Crockett said, her voice steady and respectful, "I think you might want to sit down and take a breath." The simplicity of her response sent a wave of surprise through the crowd. After all that screaming and personal attacks, Crockett's calm, almost maternal response made Harris look completely unhinged by comparison. But Harris wasn't done. "Don't tell me to sit down!" she screamed even louder. "I don't take orders from you. You work for me. This whole party works for me." That's when Crockett delivered the response that would make this moment legendary. She leaned into the microphone, and in the same calm, measured tone, she said, "Madam Vice President, with all due respect, nobody works for you. We all work for the American people. And right now, the American people are watching you have a breakdown on national television because you can't handle the fact that someone disagrees with you." The auditorium erupted. Not in cheers or boos, but in that kind of shocked murmur that happens when everyone realizes they've just witnessed something historic. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Harris, red-faced and screaming, looked completely out of control. Crockett, calm and composed, looked like the only adult in the room. People in the audience were literally turning to each other with expressions of disbelief. Some were shaking their heads. Others were covering their mouths in shock. A few people had actually started to stand up, as if they were thinking about leaving because the situation had become so uncomfortable. The media section was in a frenzy of activity. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones and laptops, trying to capture every detail of what was happening. Camera operators were zooming in on both women's faces, knowing that these images would be seen by millions of people within hours. What made Crockett's response even more powerful was the way she delivered it. She didn't rush to fill the silence after Harris's outburst. Instead, she let the Vice President's words hang in the air for a moment, allowing everyone to process what they had just heard. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear, creating an immediate contrast that everyone in the room could feel. Crockett continued, "I came here today to have a respectful discussion about our party's future. But if you'd rather yell at me than actually engage with the ideas I've brought, that says more about your leadership than it does about mine." Harris tried to respond, but she was so angry that her words came out as incoherent shouting, You can't, this is not how, I am the Vice President." The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. This was no longer the calculated anger she had started with. This was pure panic. She seemed to realize that she was losing control of the situation, but instead of trying to regain her composure, she was doubling down on the behavior that was destroying her credibility. Some people in the audience were now visibly cringing. A few had actually covered their eyes, as if they couldn't bear to watch what was happening. The second-hand embarrassment was palpable throughout the auditorium. What made it even worse was that Harris kept repeating, "I am the Vice President," as if her title alone should be enough to win the argument. But titles mean nothing when your behavior undermines everything that title is supposed to represent. Crockett had just demonstrated more presidential qualities in 5 minutes than Harris had shown throughout the entire confrontation. Crockett nodded respectfully and said, "Yes, you are. And that's exactly why this behavior is so concerning. The American people deserve better than this." The crowd was now completely silent except for the sound of phone cameras recording. Everyone understood that they were witnessing a career-defining moment, but not in the way Harris had probably hoped. Harris made one final attempt to regain control. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can just embarrass me in front of all these people?" Crockett's response was perfect. "Madam Vice President, I'm not embarrassing you. You're embarrassing yourself, and more importantly, you're embarrassing our party and our country. I'm going to return to my seat now, and I hope you'll take some time to think about whether this is really how you want to represent the office you hold." But before Crockett could step away from the microphone, Harris made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "You don't understand the pressures of real leadership," she shouted. "You've never had to make the hard choices. You've never had the weight of an entire nation on your shoulders." Crockett stopped and turned back to the microphone. Her final response would become the most quoted line from the entire confrontation. "Madam Vice President, real leadership isn't about the weight you carry. It's about how you carry that weight. And right now, you're showing everyone in this room that you can't handle pressure without lashing out at the people you're supposed to be working with." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Harris seemed to realize that she had been completely outmatched. Her face went pale as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, and with that, Crockett calmly walked back to her seat, leaving Harris standing alone on the stage, still visibly shaking with anger. The entire auditorium watched in stunned silence as the Vice President of the United States had been completely outclassed by a freshman representative who never raised her voice or showed any disrespect. The moderator quickly took the microphone and called for a recess, but the damage was done. In less than 10 minutes, Kamala Harris had destroyed her credibility, and Jasmine Crockett had shown the kind of leadership that people had been hoping to see from their elected officials. The immediate aftermath was unlike anything anyone in that auditorium had ever seen. As soon as the moderator called for a recess, the room exploded into activity. People were on their phones, cameras were flashing, and everyone was talking at once. But what happened in the next few hours would prove that this moment was about to have consequences far beyond that auditorium. Within minutes, videos of the confrontation were spreading across social media faster than anyone could track. The hashtag #Crockett Calm was trending within an hour, with thousands of people sharing clips of her composed responses to Harris's screaming. But it wasn't just the calm that people were talking about. It was the substance of what she said and how she said it. The viral spread was unprecedented. Political moments usually take hours or even days to gain traction on social media. But this was different. The contrast between the two women was so stark, and the moment so shocking, that people couldn't help but share it immediately. One of the most shared videos was a side-by-side comparison that someone had created showing Harris screaming while Crockett remained completely calm. The visual impact was devastating for Harris and incredible for Crockett.